It started with a routine review of private royal archives, or so everyone believed. But when Princess Anne reportedly paused over a bundle of sealed correspondence once belonging to Queen Elizabeth II, the atmosphere inside the palace changed instantly. What appeared to be ordinary letters soon became the center of whispered conversations, closed-door meetings, and growing concern among senior royals, because hidden within those pages was something nobody expected to find. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The review itself was not supposed to attract attention. Following the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, countless documents, personal notes, letters, and historical records required careful cataloging and preservation. Much of that work unfolded quietly, far from public view, handled by trusted archivists and senior members of the royal household. It was a process rooted in tradition, one designed to protect both history and privacy. Yet according to reports circulating within royal circles, something unusual occurred when Princess Anne became involved in reviewing a specific portion of her mother's private correspondence. Known throughout the family for her discretion, diligence, and unwavering sense of duty, Anne was reportedly considered one of the most trusted figures to oversee sensitive materials connected to the late Queen's legacy. Few expected anything extraordinary to emerge. After all, Queen Elizabeth spent decades exchanging letters with political leaders, family members, advisors, and close friends. Most assumed the archives would simply reinforce what the public already knew about a monarch devoted to service and stability. But then came the discovery that allegedly changed everything. According to palace insiders, Anne reportedly encountered a collection of sealed correspondence that appeared to have remained largely untouched for years. Unlike official communications or well-documented historical records, these letters were said to occupy a more private category. Some reportedly contained personal reflections. Others allegedly included handwritten notes attached to formal documents. What immediately caught attention was not merely their existence, but the fact that several members of the archival team had apparently been unaware of their significance. As word of the discovery quietly spread among those involved, the atmosphere reportedly shifted. Archivists who initially viewed the documents as routine material allegedly became increasingly cautious. Questions emerged about why certain pieces of correspondence had remained separate from other collections. More importantly, questions began forming about the subjects discussed within them. According to some reports, the contents prompted immediate notifications to senior aides, an unusual step that suggested the material might carry implications extending far beyond historical interest. Soon afterward, trusted members of the royal household reportedly became involved in a series of discreet discussions. These were not public meetings. There were no announcements and no official statements. Yet observers familiar with palace operations allegedly noticed subtle signs that something significant was unfolding behind closed doors. Conversations became more guarded. Access to certain materials reportedly became more restricted. The sense of curiosity gradually evolved into concern. What made the situation especially intriguing was the growing mystery surrounding the letters themselves. Why had they remained unseen for so long? Were they intentionally separated from other correspondence? Had they simply been overlooked within the vast archives accumulated during a 70-year reign? No clear answers emerged. Instead, speculation began filling the void. Some insiders suggested the documents touched upon issues the Queen considered deeply important, but never intended to discuss publicly. Others whispered about private reflections concerning the monarchy's future and the challenges facing future generations. Then came the rumor that transformed curiosity into genuine intrigue. According to growing speculation within royal circles, portions of the correspondence may have related to succession planning and the long-term stability of the crown. If true, such material would carry extraordinary significance. The late Queen devoted her entire life to protecting the institution she inherited, and any private concerns she recorded would inevitably attract intense interest from those responsible for guiding the monarchy into its next chapter. What began as a routine archival review was suddenly becoming something much larger. The letters had been found, but the real story was only beginning to emerge. And with every new question, the sense of anticipation inside royal circles continued to grow. But finding the letters was only the beginning. What they revealed about the late queen's private concerns would soon send shockwaves through the very heart of the monarchy. The letters were not hidden in a vault or protected behind layers of security. Instead, they sat quietly among thousands of pages that had escaped public attention for decades. Yet once Princess Anne began reading them, it became clear these were unlike any other royal documents. What made the collection so unusual was not its appearance, but its tone. According to reports from those familiar with the discovery, the correspondence blended formal communications with deeply personal reflections in a way rarely seen within royal archives. Many documents associated with the monarchy focus on official matters, ceremonial duties, or constitutional responsibilities. These letters, however, were allegedly different. They appeared to offer glimpses into private concerns, family discussions, and thoughts that were never intended for public scrutiny. The further Anne reportedly read, the more apparent it became that she was not simply reviewing historical records. She was uncovering a personal narrative woven quietly alongside decades of public service. At first, the significance may not have been immediately obvious. The collection reportedly sat among countless pages accumulated throughout Queen Elizabeth II's remarkable reign. There were letters exchanged with advisors, handwritten observations attached to briefing papers, and private notes recorded during moments of significant change. Individually, many appeared ordinary. Together, however, they began revealing a pattern that attracted increasing attention from those entrusted with preserving the late Queen's legacy. According to speculation surrounding the documents, several references touched upon sensitive family discussions that unfolded behind palace walls. These were not public disputes or newspaper controversies. Instead, they reportedly reflected private concerns about relationships, responsibilities, and the challenges facing future generations of royals. For observers accustomed to viewing Queen Elizabeth as the embodiment of calm stability, the possibility of seeing her personal reflections added a powerful emotional dimension to the discovery. Particularly striking were reports suggesting that some notes contained direct observations allegedly written by the Queen herself. If accurate, such material would offer a rare glimpse into how she viewed the institution she spent her life protecting. Sources familiar with the situation claimed recurring themes emerged throughout the correspondence: duty, continuity, stability. Again and again, the letters reportedly returned to the question of how the crown could endure during periods of uncertainty. These were not merely administrative concerns. They appeared to reflect a monarch thinking constantly about the future. As Anne continued reviewing the collection, one theme allegedly became impossible to ignore. The correspondence frequently referenced the importance of preserving stability during times of transition. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth witnessed dramatic social, political, and cultural changes. She understood that succession was not simply a constitutional process, but a moment capable of reshaping public confidence in the monarchy itself. According to reports, the letters suggested she devoted considerable thought to ensuring those transitions occurred as smoothly as possible. It was reportedly at this stage that Anne recognized the significance of what she was reading. Those close to royal operations often describe her as one of the most experienced and institutionally minded members of the family. If anyone understood the potential importance of such material, it was her. Sources suggest that concerns about context, interpretation, and authenticity quickly followed. Before any conclusions could be drawn, advisors and archival experts were reportedly brought in to examine the documents carefully. Their task was not simply to verify handwriting or dates. It was to understand the circumstances surrounding each piece of correspondence. Why had certain letters been grouped together? Why had some observations remained largely unnoticed for so long? And perhaps most importantly, what broader message emerged when the documents were viewed as a complete collection rather than isolated records? As experts reportedly worked through those questions, a growing realization began taking hold. If the correspondence genuinely reflected the Queen's private thinking, it could influence how future generations understood her approach to succession and the long-term future of the monarchy. Yet even among all the documents reviewed, One particular series of letters reportedly attracted special attention. As experts examined the correspondence, one particular series of letters stood apart from all the others, and that was where the real mystery began. For decades, Queen Elizabeth II projected unwavering confidence in public. But behind closed doors, the correspondence painted a far more complex picture. The Queen was thinking years ahead, preparing for challenges that few others could see coming. The deeper experts reportedly examined the correspondence. The clearer one reality became. These were not the reflections of a monarch focused solely on the present. They revealed the thoughts of someone constantly looking beyond immediate events and considering how decisions made today might affect the institution decades into the future. Throughout her reign, Queen Elizabeth II became synonymous with stability. To the public, she often appeared unshaken by political turbulence, family controversies, or social change. Yet according to reports surrounding the letters, her private observations suggest she spent far more time contemplating potential threats to the monarchy than many people ever realized. One recurring theme allegedly appeared throughout multiple pieces of correspondence: the long-term stability of the crown. Rather than concentrating on individual personalities, the Queen reportedly returned again and again to the institution itself. The letters suggested a monarch deeply aware that every generation inherits responsibilities from those who came before it, and must safeguard those responsibilities for those yet to come. According to sources familiar with the material, there was little focus on popularity or public approval. Instead, the correspondence repeatedly emphasized duty, resilience, and the ability to place institutional needs above personal interests. That emphasis reportedly became even more striking when experts encountered references to historic succession crises. Over centuries, the monarchy has survived periods of uncertainty that threatened its future. Abdications, family divisions, public scandals, and constitutional challenges have all tested the institution's strength. According to reports, Queen Elizabeth's correspondence reflected a deep awareness of those historical lessons. She appeared to view history not as a collection of distant events, but as a guidebook filled with warnings for future generations. The message emerging from several letters seemed remarkably consistent. Institutions endure only when leaders remain focused on service, rather than self-interest. As the review continued, another concern allegedly surfaced repeatedly: public trust. The Queen reportedly understood that the monarchy's survival depends not merely on constitutional authority, but on maintaining confidence among the people it serves. Trust, once damaged, can take years to rebuild. According to insiders, several passages appeared to reflect concerns about preserving continuity during periods of transition, when public attention naturally intensifies and uncertainty often grows. These were not dramatic predictions. They were thoughtful reflections from a monarch who had spent a lifetime observing how institutions succeed and how they fail. Yet perhaps the most intriguing element involved references to future family tensions. Reports suggest that some observations contained private warnings about the challenges that can emerge when personal relationships intersect with public responsibilities. The Queen allegedly recognized that every generation of royals would face its own unique pressures. While circumstances change, the underlying challenge remains remarkably similar. Balancing individual ambitions with institutional duty has tested royal families throughout history, and the correspondence reportedly reflected a keen awareness of that reality. For Princess Anne, these recurring themes allegedly became impossible to ignore. Those familiar with her role describe someone deeply committed to preserving her mother's legacy, and according to reports, she grew increasingly concerned as the pattern emerged. The letters were not offering simple historical commentary. They appeared to contain guidance, observations, and warnings intended to outlast the circumstances that originally inspired them. As a result, senior royals were reportedly briefed quietly on the findings. Discussions that began as archival reviews gradually evolved into conversations about meaning and interpretation. What exactly was the Queen trying to communicate? Were her observations intended as private reflections, or did they carry broader significance for future generations? Those questions reportedly sparked intense debate among those trusted. to understand the late monarch's thinking. And then came the passage that changed everything. According to insiders, one particular section stood apart from all the others. Its wording was unusual, its implications were unclear, yet the more people examined it, the more attention it attracted. Yet among those warnings was one passage so unexpected that even seasoned palace insiders struggled to understand its significance. One letter reportedly contained a name that appeared again and again throughout the correspondence. It was not presented as a command or decree. Instead, it appeared as part of the Queen's deepest reflections about the future of the institution she spent her life protecting. According to accounts circulating within royal circles, it was this recurring reference that transformed curiosity into genuine intrigue. Up until that point, the correspondence had been viewed primarily as a collection of personal reflections and institutional observations. Important, certainly. Historically valuable, without question. But the repeated appearance of a particular name reportedly altered the entire conversation. Suddenly, the focus shifted away from general themes and toward a specific question. Why had Queen Elizabeth returned to this individual so frequently when discussing the future of the monarchy? What made the situation especially compelling was the way the references were allegedly written. Sources familiar with the correspondence suggest the Queen did not present the name as part of a formal instruction or definitive recommendation. There were reportedly no direct orders, no constitutional declarations, and no attempts to alter established succession rules. Instead, the references appeared woven into broader reflections about continuity, responsibility, and leadership. The tone, according to reports, was thoughtful rather than directive. Yet that subtlety only deepened the mystery because it left room for interpretation. As experts and advisors examined the material, differing opinions reportedly began emerging almost immediately. Some interpreted the repeated references as evidence of the Queen's confidence in a particular individual's ability to help guide the institution through future challenges. Others argued that the name appeared frequently, simply because that person occupied a central role during significant periods of her reign. Without explicit explanations attached to every mention, conclusions remained elusive. Yet uncertainty rarely diminishes interest. More often, it intensifies it. Soon, historians and royal advisors reportedly found themselves debating not only the meaning of the references, but the broader vision they appeared to support. The correspondence seemed less concerned with specific events, and more focused on the long-term survival of the monarchy itself. That distinction became increasingly important. If the Queen was repeatedly mentioning the same figure while discussing institutional stability, then perhaps the significance lay not in the individual alone, but in what that individual symbolized. Within palace circles, different factions allegedly began drawing very different conclusions. Some believed the correspondence reinforced existing assumptions about the monarchy's future direction. Others suspected it hinted at concerns or priorities that had never been fully understood during the Queen's lifetime. As those interpretations spread, discussions reportedly became more intense. Every letter seemed to generate additional questions. Every answer appeared to reveal a new layer of complexity. For Princess Anne, the uncertainty reportedly created a new challenge. Rather than accepting early conclusions, she allegedly sought additional context. Sources suggest she began reviewing related documents, searching for references that might clarify the Queen's intentions. If the recurring name truly held special significance, understanding the surrounding circumstances would be essential. Isolated passages can be misleading. Patterns matter. Context matters. And Anne reportedly understood that better than anyone. The deeper the investigation progressed, the more observers began comparing the situation to previous royal transitions. Throughout history, monarchs have often left behind clues about their hopes, concerns, and expectations for future generations. Rarely are those messages straightforward. More often, they emerge through letters, diaries, and reflections that reveal themselves gradually over time. Some insiders reportedly wondered whether this discovery represented a similar moment, an opportunity to better understand how Queen Elizabeth viewed the future long before others recognized the challenges ahead. Meanwhile, speculation continued spreading beyond the immediate circle of advisors and archivists. The story had become impossible to ignore. What began as a routine archival review was evolving into one of the most discussed royal mysteries in recent memory. Yet, even amid the growing fascination, many believed attention remained focused on the wrong detail. Because the more Princess Anne reportedly investigated, the more it appeared that the recurring name was only part of a much larger picture. The true significance of the correspondence seemed connected not to one individual, but to the broader message running through the entire collection, a message that touched the future of the monarchy itself. But the more Princess Anne investigated, the clearer it became that the significance of the letters extended far beyond a single name. Some conversations never truly disappear. They simply wait for the right moment to return. And according to those familiar with palace history, the correspondence seemed to revive a debate that many believed had been settled years ago. As Princess Anne continued searching for context, the discussion reportedly began moving far beyond the letters themselves. What had initially appeared to be a question about private correspondence was gradually evolving into something much larger. The themes emerging from the documents seemed to touch upon issues that have shaped the monarchy for generations: questions about succession, continuity, constitutional responsibility, and the delicate balance between tradition and adaptation. Suddenly, conversations that many believed belonged to history were finding new relevance in the present. According to insiders, several passages allegedly prompted comparisons with earlier periods of royal uncertainty. Throughout British history, moments of transition have often forced difficult discussions about the future of the crown. Some transitions unfolded smoothly. Others tested the institution's resilience in ways few could have predicted. The correspondence reportedly referenced historical examples with remarkable frequency, suggesting that Queen Elizabeth viewed the past not as a collection of distant events, but as a source of guidance for challenges that might one day reappear. That realization reportedly encouraged advisors to revisit old discussions through a modern lens. Questions that once seemed settled were suddenly being examined again, not because anyone sought to rewrite established constitutional arrangements, but because the correspondence appeared to invite reflection on how those arrangements functioned during periods of uncertainty. According to reports, several advisors found themselves comparing historical recommendations with present-day realities, searching for connections that might help explain the Queen's deeper concerns. As interest intensified, royal historians were reportedly brought into the process. Their role was not to interpret the Queen's intentions directly, but to provide historical context. Certain phrases, references, and observations allegedly echoed debates that had surfaced during previous reigns. Understanding those parallels became increasingly important, because context often changes the meaning of a document. A sentence that appears straightforward on its own can carry entirely different implications when viewed alongside historical events. For Princess Anne, the growing complexity reportedly reinforced the need for caution. Those familiar with her approach describe someone who values evidence over speculation and context over assumptions. According to reports, she sought clarification from trusted experts rather than rushing toward conclusions. The deeper the review progressed, the more apparent it became that interpreting the correspondence would require extraordinary care. The risk of misunderstanding the Queen's intentions was simply too great. Soon, another challenge emerged. Questions began arising about the difference between interpretation and intention. What exactly had Queen Elizabeth intended her observations to mean? Were they warnings, reflections, historical commentary, personal concerns? Different readers reportedly arrived at different conclusions. Some viewed the correspondence as evidence of remarkable foresight. Others believed it reflected the natural caution of a monarch who spent decades preparing for every possible outcome. The lack of definitive answers only intensified the debate. As these discussions continued, the atmosphere surrounding the review reportedly became increasingly tense. What had begun as intellectual curiosity was evolving into a serious internal matter. The correspondence was no longer being examined solely as a historical discovery. It was being treated as material with potential relevance to the monarchy's future. Every new interpretation seemed to generate additional questions. Every answer appeared to open another avenue of inquiry. Observers familiar with palace operations suggest that this shift marked a crucial turning point. Once senior advisors began treating the correspondence as something more than an archival curiosity, the stakes changed dramatically. The review process became more deliberate. Access reportedly became more controlled. Conversations became increasingly focused on implications, rather than merely content. And then came the development that elevated the situation to an entirely new level. According to reports, the correspondence was eventually placed before a carefully selected group of senior figures, entrusted with understanding both the monarchy's history and its future. Until that moment, the debate had remained relatively contained. What happened next would ensure it remained that way no longer. Then came the moment when the correspondence was placed before a select group of senior figures and reactions were immediate. No public announcement was made. No official statement appeared. Yet behind palace doors, conversations reportedly became more intense than anyone anticipated. The letters had moved beyond historical interest and into territory with real consequences. Once the correspondence reached a select group of senior figures, the atmosphere reportedly changed almost immediately. What had begun as a quiet archival discovery was now being treated as a matter requiring extraordinary discretion. According to accounts circulating within royal circles, confidential meetings were convened to examine the material in greater detail. These were not routine discussions about preserving historical records. The questions being asked had become significantly more consequential. If the correspondence genuinely reflected Queen Elizabeth II's private concerns about the future of the monarchy, then understanding those concerns carried implications far beyond the archive room where the letters had first been discovered. Sources familiar with the process suggest that senior advisors approached the material with caution. Every document was reportedly reviewed repeatedly. Context was examined. Dates were compared. Historical references were analyzed. The goal was not simply to determine what the Queen had written, but to understand what she may have intended future generations to learn from those observations. Yet despite those efforts, agreement proved elusive. The correspondence seemed to invite multiple interpretations, and that became the source of growing tension. Some advisors reportedly viewed the letters primarily as personal reflections from a monarch known for thinking decades ahead. In their view, the documents offered insight into Queen Elizabeth's mindset, but did not necessarily require action. Others saw something more significant. They believed the recurring themes, historical references, and repeated concerns about continuity suggested a deliberate attempt to leave guidance for those responsible for protecting the institution after her reign. The difference between those interpretations may have appeared subtle, but the implications were enormous. As the discussions continued, another question began emerging. Should any portion of the correspondence ever become public? According to reports, opinions differed sharply. Some argued that releasing selected material could help illuminate the late Queen's remarkable dedication to duty and long-term planning. Others warned that public disclosure could invite endless speculation, selective interpretation, and media scrutiny. Once private correspondence enters the public domain, context is often lost. Every phrase becomes a headline. Every observation becomes a debate. The risks were impossible to ignore. Throughout these conversations, Princess Anne reportedly remained at the center of the process. As the individual who first recognized the significance of the documents, her perspective carried considerable weight. Those familiar with her reputation often describe her as practical, disciplined, and deeply protective of the institution. According to insiders, she repeatedly emphasized the importance of understanding the material accurately, rather than allowing speculation to shape conclusions. Yet even that careful approach could not eliminate the growing sense that the correspondence touched upon issues of unusual importance. Outside the immediate circle reviewing the documents, rumors reportedly began spreading. Palace staff noticed unusual activity. Trusted advisors became increasingly occupied. Conversations grew more guarded. Although few people knew the details, many sensed that something significant was unfolding. In an environment where information rarely remains contained for long, curiosity began expanding beyond those directly involved. That growing curiosity only increased concerns about public reaction. If details emerged prematurely, they could easily be misinterpreted. Commentators would inevitably search for hidden meanings. Royal observers would connect the correspondence to ongoing debates about succession, leadership, and the monarchy's future. What began as an internal discussion could rapidly become a national story. According to reports, that possibility weighed heavily on those responsible for managing the situation. At the same time, a larger debate reportedly continued beneath the surface. The correspondence seemed to raise fundamental questions about the future direction of the monarchy itself. What lessons had Queen Elizabeth hoped future generations would learn? Which concerns had she considered most urgent? And why did certain themes appear repeatedly throughout the collection? Every meeting seemed to generate new questions rather than definitive answers. Yet as advisors debated meaning, strategy, and potential consequences, attention gradually began concentrating on one issue above all others. Because hidden within the correspondence appeared to be implications that could affect a particular individual more directly than anyone else. And as that realization spread through royal circles, the focus of the entire discussion began to shift. But while insiders argued over meaning, attention turned toward the person who might be most affected by what the correspondence seemed to suggest. The monarchy has always depended on certainty, yet certainty was exactly what seemed to be slipping away. As interpretations of the correspondence circulated, attention focused on what the Queen may have envisioned for generations yet to come. What began as an archival discovery had now evolved into a debate about the future itself. The correspondence was no longer being viewed simply as a collection of personal reflections. According to reports from royal circles, it had become a lens through which senior figures were examining some of the most important questions facing the monarchy. The recurring themes of continuity, responsibility, and long-term planning seemed to point beyond the present moment and toward generations that had not yet assumed their full place within the institution. That realization altered the entire conversation. As discussions intensified, increasing attention reportedly focused on future succession scenarios, not because anyone questioned established constitutional arrangements, but because the correspondence appeared to reveal how deeply Queen Elizabeth II thought about the challenges that accompany transitions of power. Throughout her reign, she witnessed firsthand how uncertainty can affect public confidence. She understood that succession is not merely a legal process. It is an emotional and symbolic moment that shapes perceptions of stability. According to those familiar with the letters, her observations suggested an awareness that every generation inherits both opportunities and vulnerabilities from those who came before. This growing focus on the future naturally brought younger members of the royal family into the conversation. Observers reportedly noted that many of the themes emerging from the correspondence aligned with broader discussions already taking place within royal circles about long-term stewardship. How should future generations prepare for responsibilities that may still be years away? What values must remain constant even as society changes? And how can the monarchy preserve public trust while adapting to a rapidly evolving world? These questions, once considered abstract, were now being examined through the lens of the Queen's own reflections. For Princess Anne, the challenge reportedly became increasingly delicate. Those close to the process suggest she found herself balancing two competing priorities. On one hand stood institutional stability, the principle that has guided her entire public life. On the other stood public perception, a force that modern monarchies can no longer afford to ignore. Releasing information too broadly could invite misunderstanding. Keeping everything private could encourage even greater speculation. Navigating between those risks required extraordinary caution. Meanwhile, disagreement reportedly persisted among senior figures reviewing the material. Some believed the correspondence should be understood primarily as personal reflections shaped by decades of experience. Others argued that the consistency of the themes suggested something more intentional. The debate was not about what the Queen had written. It was about what those writings were meant to convey. And because no definitive answer existed, Every interpretation seemed to create fresh uncertainty. Outside palace walls, curiosity continued growing. Rumors spread. Commentators offered theories. Royal observers examined every fragment of information that emerged from behind closed doors. The absence of official clarification only intensified interest. In many ways, the correspondence had become a mirror reflecting larger anxieties about the future of the monarchy itself. People were no longer asking only what the letters contained. They were asking what the letters meant. That distinction mattered because meaning carries consequences. If the correspondence truly revealed how Queen Elizabeth viewed the institution's future, then its significance extended far beyond history. It touched questions of leadership, legacy, and continuity. It invited people to reconsider assumptions that had long gone unchallenged. And with every passing week, the sense of anticipation only grew stronger. Yet amid all the analysis, debate, and speculation, one fact remained unchanged. No one believed the full story had been uncovered. There were still unanswered questions, still unexplored connections, still pieces of the puzzle that refused to fit neatly into place. Then, according to reports, investigators reviewing the materials stumbled upon something unexpected, something that forced everyone involved to reconsider what they thought they understood. And just when it seemed the mystery could go no further, one final discovery reframed everything that came before it. In the end, the letters may not have changed the line of succession itself, but they changed something just as powerful: the way the royal family understood the late Queen's final hopes for the future. And that realization carried consequences nobody could have predicted. As the final review of the correspondence drew to a close, those involved reportedly began recognizing that the true significance of the discovery had never been about constitutional rules or dramatic alterations to the monarchy's structure. The letters had not rewritten history. They had not overturned tradition. What they had done, according to those familiar with the process, was provide an extraordinary glimpse into the private thoughts of a monarch whose public composure often concealed the depth of her long-term concerns. In doing so, they offered something far more valuable than instruction. They offered perspective. Throughout months of examination, debate, and interpretation, one conclusion reportedly emerged with increasing clarity. Queen Elizabeth II had spent much of her life thinking not about herself, but about the institution she would eventually leave behind. The correspondence consistently returned to themes of continuity, responsibility, public trust, and service. Those were not abstract concepts to her. They were the foundations upon which she believed the monarchy depended. According to palace insiders, understanding that pattern fundamentally changed how many people viewed the collection. For Princess Anne, the discovery reportedly became one of the most important responsibilities she had undertaken since her mother's passing. It was Anne who first recognized that the documents deserved closer attention. It was Anne who reportedly insisted on careful examination rather than rushed conclusions. And it was Anne who helped ensure that the correspondence was understood within its proper context. Those close to the process suggest that without her persistence, many of the letters might have remained little more than overlooked archival material. As awareness of the discovery gradually expanded, palace insiders reportedly acknowledged its importance. Not because the correspondence dictated future decisions, but because it illuminated the values that shaped one of the most consequential reigns in modern history. The letters appeared to reveal a queen who never stopped preparing for challenges that others had yet to recognize. Even in private reflections, she seemed focused on protecting the institution from uncertainty and ensuring that future generations understood the weight of their responsibilities. Outside palace walls, public fascination continued growing. The story resonated because it touched upon questions people had long wondered about. How did Queen Elizabeth truly view the future of the monarchy? What concerns occupied her thoughts during moments away from public scrutiny? And what lessons did she hope would survive beyond her reign? The correspondence did not provide simple answers, but it encouraged a deeper appreciation for the complexity of her legacy. At the same time, discussions about succession inevitably evolved. The line of succession itself remained unchanged, yet public understanding of succession became more nuanced. Observers increasingly viewed it not merely as a legal process, but as a responsibility, requiring preparation, stewardship, and an unwavering commitment to service. In that sense, the correspondence influenced perceptions even without altering formal arrangements. The monarchy itself now faced renewed questions about its future. How should future generations balance tradition with adaptation? How can public trust be maintained during periods of transition? What responsibilities accompany leadership in an era of constant scrutiny? These questions existed before the letters were discovered, but the correspondence gave them new urgency and new context. Perhaps that is why the discovery became one of the most discussed royal revelations in years. It was not because the documents contained sensational secrets. It was because they revealed something far more enduring. They showed that the voice of Queen Elizabeth II continues to resonate long after her reign ended. Through her reflections, concerns, and observations, she remains part of conversations shaping the monarchy's future. And in the end, that may be the most remarkable legacy of all. The crown passes from one generation to the next. Responsibilities change hands. New leaders emerge. Yet the principles that sustain institutions often survive through the wisdom left behind by those who came before. According to those who reviewed the correspondence, that wisdom was present on nearly every page. Because while crowns pass from one generation to the next, the true power of a monarch often survives in the words they leave behind. And those words may continue shaping the future long after they are gone. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.